His little butt is in the way of where I want to move my chair. Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. I am a little bit under the weather, but we are persisting. Today I wanted to talk about the 5 books from the small book club that I've been hosting this year. The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford, Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh, and The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. These 5 books were submitted and then voted on by the voting tier of my patrons over on Patreon. So this is the second year of running this small book club. The only criteria for the books being submitted are that they are around the 250 page mark, because the idea is that we want like small, easy to pick up things. We don't want massive time commitments. And this also works out well for like hosting the discussion, because I usually end up rereading these a couple of times in putting together the discussions for this. So if they were massive tomes, that would not be doable. I've realized that this year the books themselves are quite homogenous and the authors of the books are also very homogenous. So stats, yay! So of the 5 books, 4 out of 5 in my opinion fall under the umbrella of speculative fiction, under the umbrella of like the fantastic. The outlier there would be Virginia Woolf's 2 essays that were combined into a book that reads like fiction, A Room of One's Own. That is not under that umbrella of like fantasy, sci-fi, horror, whatever. That's worth noting that there's a genre interest in like folks who follow this channel, which makes sense. The other thing that I ended up noting only in hindsight is that 4 out of 5 authors are from the UK, the exception being, is it Sue Rainsford? Yeah, Sue Rainsford is from Ireland. She's from Dublin. Not very diverse. The gender split, we have 3 women and 2 men, which is not bad. With those stats in mind, like what I am thinking about, what I have learned is that maybe I need to give more specificity for the submissions each month. So instead of just being like 250 pages, any book, maybe it should be like 250 pages, an author of color, 250 pages, a work that has been translated. Give a this plus that, right? So that we're still meeting like a bite-sized book that's digestible, but we're also challenging ourselves as a book club. Now I would like to talk a little bit about each book, something that I took away from it, and like a reason to read it. Our first book of the year was The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This is a bite-sized piece of fantasy literature. It follows an unnamed boy protagonist who gets involved with his neighbors, the Hempstocks, who live down the lane. What I really appreciated about this book was the discussions of gender. So our boy is sort of soft and unmasculine. There's a quote that's like, this was the first birthday cake for a boy's party that had a book on it instead of like a football or a train or something. So like he's set up to be this sort of soft man, a little bit of a loner, a little bit of an artist. In contrast, the women in this book are all really powerful. Both the antagonist, who is a woman, is powerful, and then the Hempstock women are also very powerful. The discussions around gender with this were really fun. Thinking about gender identity was really fun. This also plays a lot with folklore, like a lot of Gaiman's works. We have the mother maiden crone represented here in the 3 generations of Hempstock women. This was just a lot of fun. For a tiny package, there is so much packed in here. I think I actually read this 3 times. There are 3 colored post-it notes in here, which to me means that I read this at least 3 times. This was so good. I feel like if you haven't stepped into Gaiman, now I know that Gaiman is quite a popular author, and in my experience, an author being really popular results in one of 2 things: you have read him and you're like, please recommend me someone that isn't like a household name, or you've heard it and you're like, it's overhyped. If you're in the it's overhyped camp, this could be a really good place to sample Gaiman's writing, his works, the themes that he is interested in as an author, because in my experience with his children's literature and adult fiction, this sort of bridges his interests in both marketing categories. I really think this could be a good way to sample his work. I can't remember if there are any content warnings for this. Some of the books that we read this year are like, holy shit, like demonetized instantly. Then we read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This is sort of the outlier piece, but at the same time that it's the outlier, quite a lot of Woolf's words I found haunting me throughout the rest of this book club, because I did set a sort of challenge for myself to try and connect the texts where I could. The very famous, like, a woman needs a room of her own and money to write. Something that we talked about quite a bit was like, this was a new idea for white wealthy women at the time. The sentiment behind it that a person needs a space and the money to allot time to make art, regardless of your age, class, gender, race, sexuality, whatever. Artists require their own space and money to support their living, like the roof over their head, the food in their bellies, to dedicate a life to art. Now, something that as we move along in feminist thinking is the idea that intersecting identities put some people at an advantage over others. In some ways, I like the sentiments behind this book, behind these arguments, and I think we can still see it to a certain extent. I don't know that I would recommend reading this with your eyes. If you can, do audiobooks. The narration, I think, comes across better, because when I was reading this, I ended up giving this the most unsympathetic, pretentious tone, and I was like, I hate this. I hate the narrator. They can go fuck right off. What am I doing here? Like, how am I gonna host a discussion on this book? And then I listened to the audiobook, and hearing somebody give this tone, and a completely different tone than I had been reading it, I realized how clever the writing was and how, like, quippy, I guess, the narrator is being. The narrator is constantly getting interrupted. Like, she's like, oh, I have this really important point. Oh, and then dinner's served. And like, that point is gone. That is exactly why people creating need a space, a room of their own, because you need to be able to shut the door and not have this like magic thought be interrupted and completely derailed and you never go back to it, right? So like, the audiobook made it much easier to get into the ideas of the book. So I enjoyed thinking about this. I enjoyed putting the notes together for this. I don't know that I would recommend this in and of itself. Then we read Follow Me to Ground, which has so much content warnings. So Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford is about not humans, but creatures who are born of the ground, who look human, who do magic medicine on the human, and they're sort of on the outskirts of a small town. So it's Ada and her father. Now, Ada looks perpetually underaged. She looks childlike, even though she is much older. The problem is she enters into a sexual relationship with a man named Samson, who seems to enjoy the fact that she looks childlike. So we've got some debatably sexual assault, debatably pedophilia happening here. There's also incest in this book, because Samson is also boinking his sister. I think there might be miscarriage in here as well. Really, it's a kind of quiet story It's about the characters and their oddities. The chapters in between are told from the perspectives of the locals who either go to Ada and her father for magical medical cures or who avoid them because they find them unsettling. We get this folklore, this local lore created around Ada and her father. Woolf, in A Room of One's Own, talks about how like the witches and the isolated woman on the edge of town, the herbalist, is always a like starving artist, like an artist interrupted. So I wondered if that was a way that we could maybe read Ada, that she is somebody who is really creative, who is suffering because she isn't given the space to do her creative work. Overall, this was a weird little read. I think somewhere it's described as meaty. I think meaty is a great way to describe this text. It is wild, it is wacky, it is odd, it is gross, and I loved it. I absolutely loved this. If the content warnings aren't gonna bother you and you want something kind of weird, follow me to ground. Then we read Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. This is the first of the Green Man duology. I have read both. I feel like the first half of this novel and the back half of this novel belong to different ideas. We're looking at Tobias, who is this woodman. He's sort of out of time, out of place, eternally tied to this woods. He's its protector, he's its guardian. And the new landlord, Silver, coming in and sort of befriending him. First half of this book is like, ooh, Green Man folklore, like dryads and ents and like living trees and plants and ooh, mysterious forest. And then the back half of this book is alternative universe, Victorian era monster hunters. So this book was interesting. I ended up reading a lot into the Green Man folklore, which it turns out I really enjoy, like the idea of this creepy figure, slightly ominous, maybe slightly fatherly, like depending on who's telling the story in the woods. I love that. Repression. We ended up talking a little bit about repression here and things that are constantly pushed down, buried, causing a sickness. And I think we tied this back to Follow Me to Ground as well, where there is a lot of repression happening. A secret is buried in the ground at one point in Follow Me to Ground. Like there's burial, there's a pushing down into the ground and that always having a terrible consequence. Would I recommend this? I think honestly, I liked the second book in this duology better. This is a book where not a lot happens. Like a lot of things are introduced, but none of it has like a satisfying payoff. I feel like the quality of Tesh's writing is beautiful and you just sort of sit there eating up this spectacularly delicious writing, but the plot points are lacking, and I feel like the short form of a novella is maybe not where she shines. I think she needs more space to develop these really cool ideas. If you're interested, I would say borrow the duology from your library, because I feel like the more I reread this, and I did end up rereading this several times, the less I liked it, because I found more and more things didn't stand up to the logic of the world being created. I do think that like if you like the foresty vibes, there are definitely other books out there. Once There Were Wolves has like a similar like woodsy forest vibe. Arguably the father that's seen in parts of Once There Were Wolves is sort of a Green Man figure. I think Naomi Novik's It's Uprooted by Naomi Novik, the title that I am blanking on. Also, I would like to add to this list Lanny by Max Porter for Green Man vibes. If you really like Tobias as the Green Man figure, Lanny by Max Porter is about a Green Man figure, a dead Papa Toothwort. It's sort of formally interesting, like it's a little bit poetic. So that's a fun one as well. If you want similar vibes that I think are overall executed better and will stand up to rereading more. The final book that we read, I just did the live stream for, is The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. Content warnings for this: sexual assault, rape, miscarriage, suicide, infant death, murder, mansplaining. So this is a book about a small town, the town of Midwich, which experiences a day out. There's basically like a dome that descends over Midwich. Anybody who tries to cross this barrier falls unconscious immediately. It lasts for 24 hours and then it lifts and everybody inside's seemingly unaffected after 24 hours under the dome, and so it's sort of, it doesn't make any news, no one's really paying attention to it. But then a few months down the road, anybody who is capable of bearing children discovers that they are pregnant, and three men, the doctor, the vicar, and the sort of local scholar, Mr. Zellaby, form a committee of men to shape the narrative and control the women's reactions to this experience. Hello, second pass editing Emily here. I just wanted to clarify, I am attempting to use inclusive language here, and occasionally I switch between or say both women and pregnant people. The text was written in the 50s and so reflects the idea that sex and gender are the same, which we know is not true, that gender is something that we perform and it is separate from our biological sex. You can see me in the next little bit. Every time I use women and pregnant people, I am trying to acknowledge that the characters in the book are referred to as women, and that today it would be more inclusive to say pregnant people. Like if a dome descended over a village, we would be looking at pregnant people. Many genders of humans who are capable of becoming pregnant would have experienced this phenomena, supernatural phenomena, in the text. Eventually the women give birth to these otherworldly children that have otherworldly abilities, and it asks a lot of questions about gender, about morality, about ethics, about how we engage with beings and ascribe rights to them. The biggest thing here that was fascinating and frustrating was the narrative form itself. Now, I think this is all deliberate. I think it's very cleverly done. This is a book about women. It's about pregnant people. You would think that our narrative point of view should maybe involve the women, but it doesn't. It's always mediated through men. So our narrator is Richard Gayford, and Richard sort of is recounting this tale. He is our eyes into the experience. You will have moments where a woman is really vulnerable and expresses her thoughts to her husband, to another man, and that man then mediates that information to Richard, who then we hear telling the story. So we never hear the woman's voices. We never hear the pregnant people's voices, and they are saying things that are really important, really impactful, but they are not allowed to make any decisions because men are controlling the situation, from the husbands, from the village leadership, to like the military that is monitoring the situation. It's men at all steps who are making decisions over women's bodies. And it was incredibly relatable, considering this came out, I believe, in 1957. How applicable this still is in 2022, like Roe versus Wade, that the people making policies for people who can get pregnant are not listening to them, that the people with the loudest voices making the decisions are not the ones impacted still in 2022. It's frustrating, and I feel like this is maybe my favorite of John Wyndham's books so far, simply because it has stood up so well. Like the larger discussions happening here stand up so well. Is it forward thinking, or is it just realistic, brutally realistic about humanity and our inability to progress? I don't know, but this was one mindfuck of a read that I'm still thinking about now. Absolutely loved this. If you can handle the content warnings for this, it is worth the read. The last section that I want to talk about is what can I do better? This is the second year running this club. All of my live streams in 2021 were patron exclusives, and we were alternating reading, I think, The Dark Tower for most of last year. Anyways, it was alternating Stephen King, like hefty tomes, with small reads that were manageable. I decided to open up the small book club to everybody just because it was such a small group. And I think what everybody wants out of this is like the discussion point, like seeing different viewpoints. So I decided to open up to YouTube, and I feel like we've seen differing successes. For the most part, I do recognize most of the people active in the chat from Patreon anyway. So I have clearly done a bad job of advertising or communicating. Like, I haven't been the most effective as a communicator, clearly, in promoting this book club to get people to show up to the lives. In the new year, in the next iteration of this small book club, I do want to try maybe some different things to try and get more people attending the live and making the book club, like the discussion, like wider. What else have I learned? Oh, having these videos as like evergreen content on the channel is nice, because I feel like this is some of my most involved work. It's the work that I really enjoy doing. Every month I'm carving out space to do something that I really enjoy, which is like the sort of academic research portion, to stretch my little academic leggies. Now, I do realize that not everybody likes long form content, so I'm wondering if I maybe need to take the live recording and like edit it down maybe? I don't know if there's some way to like repurpose the content into a smaller thing that could also live on the channel. Those are the reflections on this year of the book club. I will leave links to all of the videos, all of the live streams down below if anyone is interested in going back and seeing my thoughts on these books. Thank you to my patrons who make videos like this possible. There will be 2 more patron exclusive live streams this year. One of them is the last Red Rum Book Club of the year. We're meeting on December 3rd, I believe, to talk about The Running Man, which is fucked up. Holy shit, I'm in the middle of reading it right now, and wow. It's set in 2025, and 2025 is bleak in this Stephen King's projection of where we were going. If you're interested in that, that's open to patrons at all tiers. And then in December, we're gonna have another patron exclusive live stream where I wanna sort of chat about the year, what we're doing together, what we wanna do moving forwards, any like suggestions, you know, as I'm planning for 2023. And also I wanna talk about Anna and the Apocalypse, a like zombie movie, musical, from what I understand. So we'll have like some like housekeeping chat, and then also I can only anticipate a zombie Christmas musical being fucking wacky and a delight to talk about. So both of those are patron exclusives happening in December. I hope you are doing well, that you are staying safe, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!